Welcome back to the Culture Based Podcast. I'm Dustin. He's Blake. We're happy to be with you today to wrap up the month of May. I was having this conversation, Blake, with my wife, just real quick to ease us into this conversation because everybody's coming off a holiday. May, this particular month of May, 2024 is when we're recording this. Did it feel quick to you or did it drag a little bit?
Nah, this May felt really fast.
Yeah.
For me. And not just because, the Indy 500, but because it felt fast.
Ooh. Brought in local reference. Yeah. I dig it. Yeah, it felt fast to me too. Let me ask you this. If the beginning of the month felt like forever ago, would you say that that's a fast month or a slow month?
Oh, I don't know.
That's where I'm getting, like, it felt like it went by really fast for me.
Yeah.
But it also, like, the beginning of the month felt like forever ago. So I don't know if that means it's fast or slow. You decide.
I don't know. Like, I totally thought it was April until like the 20th. And I was like, well, you know what? I probably have got to just bite the bullet and say it's May because
better start writing May on these things.
Yeah. The weird part is that we're going into the 6th month of a year that doesn't feel like it's even started.
Correct. That's the weirdest part.
That's weird to me.
Yeah. I'm still, in my mind, it's still 2023.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So anyway, enough of us trying to figure out what year it is. Let's get on to the show. I want to remind you that we're here to help leaders know what they're about, show where they're going, and develop a scalable team to get them there. Today, we're going to talk about now what? Not like the phrase that you say when you're trying to pick a fight with somebody, but more like, hey, we've been talking about some of these scaling techniques. So what do we do now? And we'll get into that here in just a second. But before we do, I would love for you to subscribe if you're listening on an audio podcast platform. Thank you for listening. We appreciate you listening, downloading, tuning in, however you take it in. We would appreciate a 5-star review. Rate this. Helps us get this content out even further to people like yourself who can really benefit from it. If you're watching on YouTube, hello there. We're so glad that you're here. We'd love for you to hit the thumbs up button, also known as the like. While you're there, go ahead and hit the subscribe and the thumbs up as well. I did recently get the new MacBook, so I can do this, but I think it's only on Zoom. I don't think it'll show up. On our
thumbs up thing, where it'll all of a sudden do
the thumbs up thing. This thing right here, and like lasers start shooting out. That's kind of cool. I never had that before. So.
Yeah. I'm not a big fan.
I was trying to get nerdy. My nerdy snort.
I'm like not a big fan of it because I'm a very expressive talker and I'm always throwing my hands up. So like I could be angry and I'm like, listen, we gotta do this. And it's like thumbs up. Hooray. And you're like, what? No, that's not what I'm saying at all.
I like it though. It just brings you back down to earth. Maybe you're getting too out of hand and your computer is like, hey man, it's all good. Just giving you a thumbs up. It's all good. Calm down.
Yeah.
I love it. You can follow us on social media and watch us try to make technology work there as well. You can find us at The Culture Base, BASE, on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and LinkedIn, posting some really fun content across those platforms, clips from our shows and things like that you can share with your team. Let's see, where else? Also find us on theculturebase.com. Again, that's BASE. You can find us on theculturebase.com. We're expanding some stuff there. We got some new tools coming out that we're super excited about. Obviously, we're developing this You Scalable kind of series and package of information for you to help scale your team. So we're super excited about all that. Stay tuned on our socials and our website, theculturebase.com, for that. All right. That's all the business. Let's get into it. So during the month of May, Blake, we've introduced the question, are you scalable? And we discussed how there are a few defining factors for scalability, but the most important one is your team, right? Obviously, there's innovation, there's market, there's things like that. But the most important aspect or defining factor for your scalability is your team. We introduced a formula, and we're going to review that formula here in just a little bit that allows you to determine your team's scalability. And we covered 6 different types of unscalable cultures. But last week, we laid out the ideal culture for scaling your team and thus scaling your business. All of that, Blake, leads us to the question, now what? Mm-hmm. What do we do with all of this information?
Yeah, and that's where I think people get overwhelmed very quickly, because anytime you bring something to the table, and by the way, there's nothing new to this. There's nothing novel. This is wisdom that is age old as long as time has existed. All we've done is put this stuff into a formula so that our minds pay attention and focus on them. Okay. And not that a formula is going to fix everything for you, because it won't. You have to do something with it. And that's kind of the idea here, is you've got to start putting focus on the areas that need focus. But you also got to figure out what areas need focus. Okay. So like we showed a lot of those unscalable cultures. We showed what areas were struggling. And I'm sure as you were listening and you picked up on stuff, you were probably like, "Ooh, I have a tilt towards that one," or "I think I see this happen a lot." But it doesn't mean because you can intuitively pick something up that you understand what the actual issues are. And that's where we've got to dig in a little bit deeper to say, okay, so which ones do I need to focus on? And if I've got to focus on all of them, what should I focus on first, right? And that's kind of where we talked about in past episodes that not all data points are the exact same. You know, some of them are multipliers, some of them are more like add these together to come get a base standing of where your company is, or where your culture is rather. But then where should you focus first? That's kind of, I think, what's next.
Yeah. And so we just want to recap that formula with you as we were talking through over the last month of episodes. We've been talking through this formula that we said, again, it's not anything new. We just kind of identified like, hey, these are the key factors. These are the players in the game of your scalability. And so those things are like having the right people, right? It's things like being connected to the right will and the right work. Having that component is very important. Vision, right? The clarity on purpose and vision has to be there in order to scale your business through scaling your team.
And not just vision that you have, but that you've communicated to your team. No, that's huge.
That's right. Moving on from there, it's the factor of environment. You have to have the right environment for growth and development. Yeah. And this is really where the culture piece really kicks in. You might have growth and development, but have you communicated it? Yeah. Do people know it's there? Do people benefit from it? All of those factors go into play there. And then lastly, like Blake was saying, you have to have that accountable communication in order to make all of these things work. And so when we show our formula, you can see it like as the different data points have different weights, what we qualify. And so what we're doing is we're taking the people, the will or the work, and the vision, and we're adding all of those together. That's kind of our base, what we called our base formula, or our base multiplier. I forget what phrase we used there. Yeah, that's our baseline essentially, right? Those three things. And so then we're going to take our answer from that and we're going to multiply that to our first multiplier, which is the environment for growth and development. And then we're going to take that answer and we're going to multiply it up against the percentage of accountable communication. So your percentage of your effectiveness essentially in this area, like how well are you at communicating and doing it in such a way that there's accountability involved as well. And so those are all the things that kind of come into play with our formula. And like I said, we've gone through all the different types of culture. We've run these numbers and all these different types of cultures, and we can see the effect that this has across the board, specifically in the area of you scaling your business. And I often say too, like we talked about today, is like, now what? You have to do something with it. I love the phrase that I heard many years ago, that in order for a change to happen, a change must be made.
Yeah.
Right. And so like Blake is saying, we've identified a lot of changes here that need to be made. So now we actually have to go out and do the work of making the changes. And so today we want to get into, what does that look like? What does making these changes look like throughout your team? And so Blake, I just want to start at the top of the org chart here with the executive team. What does it look like, Blake, for them to take this and do something with it? What's the action that the executive team needs to make here now that they've identified what's holding them back from scaling?
Yeah, hopefully at this point, the executive team can see that their fear of investing in areas like this, that there are quantifiables that we've hit, that they can see, oh, you know what? There is a cost here. there is a cost that if we don't spend money on something here and spend money on time or research or spending money on developing or fixing areas that are a struggle, if we don't spend the time here, our ability to scale is going to be hampered drastically. And there is cost analysis with that. And hopefully what this formula has been able to do is give them something tangible to go ahead and say, if we're going to scale and we think we can double or we can grow 40% in the next year, then you take that 40% that you're wanting to scale and you go, oh, but our likeliness of scaling is 20%. What then is our actual likeliness of scaling that 40%, 20%? And if you even just take those percentages against themselves, you are probably only going to scale 5%, 7%.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have huge expenses that hit on the backside of turnover and other areas. So your executive team, first off, has to be on board and has to understand that this investment, in which it is investment, it is not an expense. I would see it as investment more so. This investment's worth it. Then you go with your executive team and you say, okay, so what's our vision? What's our vision that we can start fleshing out for the year? And you're having your yearly annual get-togethers to say, what's this look like in the next year? And how do we have to play that against where we currently believe we are with the quantifiables from this formula? Where do we think we are so that we see what our actual likeliness of scaling looks like?
Yeah. And I'll say too, you talked about like, hey, if our goal is to scale 40%, but through the culture formula, our likelihood scalability is 20%. If you put those numbers, you match those numbers up against each other, it's an 8% chance of you actually, you probably will scale about 8%. And you'd be like, hey, you know what? 8% growth sounds really good to me. Let me just tell you how painful that 8% will be. It'll feel like you tried to grow 400-fold just to get to 8%. But how much easier you can scale quickly and effectively, not just time, not just rapid growth, right? But it's good quality scalability comes into play when you're looking at these areas. And so what we talked about too there, Blake, is looking ahead and forecasting. Mm-hmm. And, it's where you want to be, yes, but realistically, by looking at this culture formula, where you are now, what areas you need to hit on. And so then you can start to kind of get into that. I'm going to bring the formula back up just for a second so that we can reference it. But let's say, for example, that you realize when you do this formula that, your baseline here of people, work, and vision is pretty solid. But man, once you put it up against that environment for growth and development, you really start to see the struggle. That would be where you should start to look at setting some goals, looking ahead, forecasting what's going to be ahead of there for you so that you can start to put the emphasis on your weakness. You put the emphasis on your weakness, then you start to see the overall scalability score go up. Anything you would add to that, Blake?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen this with a couple companies recently where they actually were really strong in the right people connected to the right will and work and clarity on the vision. Even they were really strong, but then they didn't have clear numbers of what they were pushing their team to get to, or they had huge issues when it came to attendance, or they weren't clear on who was reporting to whom, and then the environment for development wasn't really there. And so where they felt really strong and felt connected as a people, in our minds, we're like, oh, that's culture. That's the whole part of culture. It's not, because if they're not connected to the things and other people and results, people will get burnt out from that too. And so then their capacity to scale and grow is really built upon, are you building a good growth and development structure? And do you have clear accountability, clear expectations that the whole team can work towards? Because to me, man, if you can get that baseline like that built up high, and then you can even just start increasing percentages, that's the dream, man. That is the dream right there, because all you're doing at that point is just building the whole mechanism essentially. So I highly, highly think that if you don't see those things and you just connect to people and you don't see those other parts, it's going to hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that takes us into as well something else that you need to consider as part of your next step is we have all this knowledge, right? We know we're looking ahead, we're forecasting, the executive team has a plan, but you really kind of need to look at, okay, what is your team's unique driver? Every organization is different. Can you talk about that a little bit, Blake?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's like, and I do want to hit real quick on the goal setting aspect of this too, because I think it's important that when we're setting goals, we're not just setting, I want to scale X percentage. Now what you're able to do is say, guys, we really want to bring our score on our, let's say it is accountable communication. We're 30% like percentage of our accountable communication. What if we grew that to a 50 to 60% this year? That we went through all the same questions, all the same metrics, and we were able to see we were able to increase this. Now, what your executive team and your leadership team are doing is they're setting goals with quantifiables that they're able to use as rocks, using an EOS term there, as rocks month over month, quarter over quarter. They're able to start seeing, hey, we're seeing growth in these areas. And it's going to start translating to bigger parts. And your team's unique driver, I think this is probably the innovation side. You cannot forget this part. If you're like, oh, let's just drop innovation on our product, on our process, on our service, whatever it is, let's just drop that because it's all really about the people at this point. We got to build this. You can't drop one completely to go take care of the other. Like both still have to be dealt with in a good, meaningful way. So I don't think you can drop that altogether. Make sure you're still focusing on your team's unique driver, and maybe part of your unique driver is in your team. Okay, so I wouldn't always look that your innovation is always in the product, process, or service kind of thing. It might also be in the way that your team has customer service or something like that. So you just can't forget that aspect of it.
Yeah, for sure.
But I would say that this does draw us into that part of the big question of what's next, of what do we do with all this information and all these variables and all these quantifiables that we're talking about. And we're just going to leave you there. And I think that's the whole reason we're having this episode is we can't. Okay. Yeah. We have to be able to say, what do I do next? And I think the first part is you have to identify, right? You got to see where you are. And we keep talking about like, hey, your people are a this score, your will is a this score, your work's this, and your vision's this. How do you come up with those numbers? And that's where really there's a couple ways. We're here to help, but I want you to know that I think if you're like, hey, I can't pay into anything like the culture base, I just need to do this myself and I've got the margin and time to do it, then great. Go through each of those components and come up with questions and reference back our videos here, these episodes, because we did throw out a bunch of questions to be asking and to be, basically scoring based off those questions. But we have a bunch of that internally made up. I would say if you're like, I don't have the margin, but I do have resource and I can pull someone in, hit us up. We'd love to help with this kind of thing because you've got to go into a review process to first know where are you. You can't change anything outside. I mean, I'm sure you can be like, we have zero accountability and we got to take care of that right now. I'm sure you can do that. But it is nice to know what your baseline is so that you can increase things and say, yeah, I do feel like we're getting better in this area because there's a quantifiable that said we were here and now we're here. Okay. And that's why it's important to have that review process. And we have a review process. And what we do is we just dive into the vision. We do a questions. We reach out to a lot of other companies' team members. And a lot of it's very random because we want the truth of it. And I know this is very vulnerable. And this is why you might be like, I want to do this. But also remember that if you reach out and say, hey, how you feeling about the culture? They might just be like, it's great. You got to have the right questions. Okay. It isn't just about asking people, hey, how's our vision 1 to 7? Okay, great. How's our culture 1 to 7? Neat. How's our attraction 1 to, no, can't do that. You got to ask questions that get around the fluffiness and the fact that they're probably scared shitless to respond to you. Okay. Or they're intimidated by you, or they really enjoy having a job. So they're afraid to say anything that might be critical because they don't know how you're going to respond. So maybe you feel like you can talk to your people, but I've also learned I have a really good connection with my people, but I still only probably hear 50%, and that might be generous. Okay. And so I think this is where it is nice to have someone external where there's a little bit of anonymous mentality where we can get a true understanding of these areas of vision and the culture and attraction. How are you attracting the right people? You know, right people is a big part of it, but finding right people is a bigger part of it, especially in scalability. And so finding the right people and then onboarding the right people. We say this all the time, like some 60% of people know within the first like 2 to 3 weeks whether they're going to stay somewhere long term. That's terrifying. And that should worry us that onboarding piece has to be there, because if the attraction felt like Disney World, but then you got there and it felt like a landfill, that's not great, right? You need to make sure that your attraction and your onboarding are speaking the same language.
Yeah, there's more to onboarding. There's more to that onboarding step than just physically onboarding them.
Yeah.
Right. You can be like, well, I gave them all the stuff. You know, we've had, like Blake said, we've had many episodes on this, but it can't just be, we gave them all the stuff. We showed them their desk. We gave them a stapler. What else do they want from us? Right. You know, like that's not onboarding. Like that's just courtesy, right? Yeah. Of, hey, I've got a new employee and I want them to at least have a playbook in their hands, right? There's a difference there. And so the onboarding process is not just onboarding them to your company, but the onboarding process is no different than you taking an on-ramp onto the highway.
Yep.
You don't just plow onto the highway without looking around and see what's going on and what's coming up and how many lanes are you clear to be able to get, you know, kind of merge over. It's a merging. It's a marriage is the onboarding process. And in that marriage, like we all know in society, like rushing into marriage can be a really bad thing. So rushing through the onboarding process can also be a big negative as well. So I just want to pause there for a second and say, you know, the onboarding process isn't just about you. It isn't just about them. It's about the whole of the situation and their longevity and their long-term success with the organization, thus your success.
And true communication is not how you said it. It's how you know that they understood it. Okay, that's true communication. It's not, I gave them the binder, I gave them these things, and they know it now. Do you know how often we've handed out the information, the clear information, and we've told them this stuff, and then at the end, when we say, hey, do you have any questions? And they say, well, what's vacation policy? And you just covered that. Remember, they legitimately are taking in what it has taken you years to accumulate and put together in something. They're taking all of those years in a breath and in a moment. Mm-hmm. So how you onboard is also, how often are you having to say these things? How often are you having to communicate these things? How do you make sure that they fully understand it? Like, I mean, just short of having them take some kind of quiz at the end, you know, like, which maybe that's not the best idea, but making sure that they understand it is just as important, which takes you then after they've been there and they're growing, how are you developing them through the process? Okay. And developing, you know, this becomes one of our multipliers and is directly connected to retention too. Like if they're being developed, people stay drastically longer. Like the percentage is disgusting. Even if they aren't going to be long-term or aren't long-term in their own head, they might stay an additional year to 2 years. And if they're the right person doing the right thing and just want to go out and do something else later on, that time is valuable too. Okay. So that's not just a pure loss. That could be adding great value to you. And then lastly, you know, how are you asking the right questions around retention? What do people value? What do they care about? Do they feel connected? All of those things. Just because you think, oh yeah, they definitely feel connected to the team, does not mean they definitely feel connected to the team. You have to dig in and understand where is the disconnect. And that disconnect for how people feel connected or not, it changes. So when you do build something up and feel like oh man, they're connected in this way, it'll change in a whole nother way. And so having the right questions around every one of these areas, that's why we at the Culture Base have a 360 review process for this stuff. And again, if you want to jump in and just do your own thing, we get it. That's exactly what we've done for years and it worked. But I also know, and we also know, that it takes so much effort and time to do that. And to come up with all that stuff, it takes a while. So if you want to take a easier on ramp to this process, we'd love to work with you and help out in this way.
Yeah. And so that's really the kind of the crux of today's episode is being able to look at this and kind of stand back from a distance and say, all right, now we know that these are the building blocks of scalable teams. We've seen this throughout the formula. We understand what's going on here. Where can we lean into? And I just want to show too that just like there's ways here to kind of break down each individual component, right? We always say all the way far to the left that we need to clarify, identify, and amplify. That's what we're here. That's what we're about here at the Culture Base. But inside of that, the clarity piece is the culture and the vision. The identification piece is attracting and onboarding, and the amplified piece is developing and retaining. And honestly, it's really kind of they all interchange with each other. And so you can just take one piece like we talked about earlier. You take one piece and focus on that, and it can make a big, big difference.
Yeah. And that's where like that piece before of that 360 review, it's to identify our baseline. Well, now, just like Dustin was saying, now we jump into these areas, and this is what we have to do is we're now saying, okay, how do we fix or work on culture? Let's say culture is a 3. Okay, now what's our strategy around culture or even onboarding? You know, our onboarding is like, like when it with our people aspect, it brings us to like a 3 or a 4. And we know that if we could just bring people on well, that we would be like a 6 or a 7. Cool. What's your onboarding strategy? Okay. And we call this our SLD, which you don't have to remember that. We care about this deeply because a lot of people say, oh, I'm going to go work on onboarding. Okay, cool. Yeah, we've been there. A lot of people have great ideas, and that's why they say that the graveyard is the richest place in the world, because that's where all the ideas go, because people don't know how to take an idea and take it to something. And this is where you have to have strategy around the idea first. Then you have to have some logistics behind it. Okay, so if this is our strategy, how do we bring this in for culture? You know, like how do you grow your culture? We have a, cultural analysis. Then we have a culture or a core value workout. Then we have a this, not that sheet. Then we have quarterly culture building events. And like now those are the house. Those are the things that you're going to build out. And then the last part, and this part is where it all usually dies, because sometimes we'll get strategy, less times we get the logistics, but almost never do we get how do we take these things and distribute them to the field? How do we package them and take them? We're good at taking something to our client, but we don't do that when it comes to our team, our internal client. How do we then take these ideas and implement them in such a way that our team understands, and maybe not fully, like quantifiably understands what's going on, but they understand something's happening here and they feel connected to it? How do we do those types of things? And so you have to have strategy, you have to have logistics, and you have to have distribution across all those areas. And that's why I would say, like, if you're going to do this yourself, that's the next part. So you come up with like, oh yeah, here's our baseline for this stuff. But then it's like, how do I do this? You've got to go through some type of formula like that to where you're not letting the idea be wouldn't it be cool if, how many people, no joke, how many people I have talked to who have said, man, we just need to have a program where we teach our people how to do this and this and this. And I have heard those same people say that for 10 plus years because they don't do anything with it, because it seems like, it's not really going to do a whole lot, or I just don't have the time or margin. You got to land the plane on that idea. Okay. That is a multiplier in our formula because we believe in that so deeply.
Yeah, absolutely. So all that to say, you can tackle it yourself, but I just want to say there's a safety net for you and for your employees and for your team to bring in someone else and allow them to kind of rifle through the clutter and say, okay, where can we clean this up from an outsider's perspective? Because sometimes you're just too close to your own routine. You're too close to your own ways to really even be able to see it. And so we'd love for you to go to theculturebase.com/strategy. You can schedule a free strategy session with us there, and we can start talking about some of these areas that would work for you, and specifically in these building blocks. We'll talk through the formula. We'll talk through anything that you need to in order to help you scale your team to the next level.
Yeah. And just to add to that, I talk to a lot of people who, I get a lot of coaching and consulting myself, and a lot of people that I'll talk to, they're like, yeah, but do you feel like that's beneficial? Like, do they say anything that like changes your world? And like, sure, sometimes, but it's always like very situational and in the moment kind of thing. And the way I always talk about like coaching, consulting, and having that, receiving that is like, it's like you've learned how to swim with sharks. You know how to do it. And it's great to kind of wade through the waters, and you know that when the shark's coming at you, how to respond to it. Coaching and consulting is like having someone in the crow's nest talking to you through it, though, and talking to you about how, hey, you can't both be in the system and understand the system at a high level at the same time. You need that person in the crow's nest giving you, it's really nice to have. Okay. Right. Really great to have. And like, even if you're looking for coaching, consulting, and you're not just looking for strategy hits, like, oh, help me with my strategy. If you're like, I just don't know where to start, hit us up. That's what we're here for. We want to help. And if it's creating some coaching, consulting type of package, we 100% can do that, because we want to make sure it fits what you're doing right now, because it isn't just about helping you scale. We also, like, this is the symbiotic relationship. We care deeply about creating cultures where people connect to the purpose of what they're doing in life. And so we want, like, we can only do that in our own organizations. I can only do that in my own company. Dustin can only do that in his own company, like, to X amount of people. The only way to hit more people is to help companies understand at a high level that the more you create for people like this, and the more they dive in, connect to it, they're going to have fulfilled lives. That matters equally. That's the other side of the coin for us and why we do this. And so if you even need like help in those areas, that's what we want.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well said. I think that'll wrap us up in this scalability talk that we've done through the month of May. Next week, we'll be back with you for episode 47 with some exciting new content. And we can't wait to be with you then. We'll look forward to talking to you then. Culture Base Podcast.